Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. I'm Adam Steele of Outpost Studios, and today we're doing a viewers comments video from Studio B. That is to say, I'm at home doing a bit of work while the baby's in bed. Today we're doing a viewers comments video, and I'm in the middle of filming the last part of the Impulse Responses Guitar Cab IR, the last bit of which I'm doing at home now that I've captured everything. So without further ado, let's comment on some of your comments. First up, on the Subwoofer in a recording studio video from Music is a Secret, he says, so, using an active sub with amplified passive speakers would be a real mess, ? Well, no, that really depends on your setup. Here, I think it's important to distinguish between active and passive speakers. They're not that different from each other in principle. All the difference is an active speaker, the amplifier that's needed to make it loud, is inside the same box as the speaker drivers. Whereas in a passive system, the speaker cabinet is generally the speakers in the box, and then the amplifier is separate. Now, it's perfectly possible to run a subwoofer with passive speakers. It's entirely possible to run passive subwoofers. Any which way can work perfectly fine. I would just say make sure that you're running some sort of crossover system somewhere, whether it's inbuilt into the subwoofer like it was in the video I did with the Adam Audio Sub 8s, or whether it's a separate crossover, however you make that work. Because otherwise your tops are doing too much work in the low end, and your subwoofer's probably throwing out too much kind of low-mid rumble before its natural kind of fall off. So yeah, can work perfectly fine, and I've known engineers who've used things like Yamaha NS10s with a small sub just to fill out the low end or that kind of thing. That's not what I would do, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. Someone on the Audion ID22 review, Old School 978 says, how does it compare to the HDSPE AIO or the RADAT, which are two PCI Express cards from RME. They are incredibly different. They're very different things for very different purposes. The ID22 is a great little unit. It's got two microphone preamps, which none of the RME cards have. It's got analog outputs, including dedicated headphone outputs and separate extra outputs. It's got routing and all sorts of features that the RME cards do not have. The RME cards are specifically designed to do nothing except get digital audio, that is to say audio that's on ADAT cables, SPDIF cables, that kind of thing, straight to the processor on a computer as quickly as possible for the lowest latency and the most stability that you can possibly get out of a system. From there, you need to connect preamp banks, digital to analog converters to make sure that you can actually get sound out of it. The AIO model does have, if I remember rightly, two analog inputs and two analog outputs, but there are no preamps involved for the microphone side. You would have to have mic preamps connected to it. So it's a very different thing for a very different purpose. One on the Audion Sono video, which, by the way, in that video I called it the Sono quite a lot. Turns out apparently it's pronounced Sono. Oops. Duncan Anderson said, best video on this product I've seen. Thank you very much, Duncan. I was hoping you could change the power amp tube type on the remote, but I can't see how to. As of at the moment, I'm not sure how to either. There may be a software update, don't know. Other question you had was, I used the DI box to send a clean to the DAW, but he thought there was a dry signal path through the USB on a different channel, or am I missing something? As far as I know, if you're using the DI input on the Sono on channel 1, it will go through that valve stage no matter what. As far as I know, the actual two notes cabinet modelling and the power amp modeling can all be turned off, and that's what that no cab channel is. But as for getting a completely super duper clean non-tube DI, I don't know, but I don't think there is. Having said that, if you have the input very low on that tube DI, it's very much like just having a quality valve DI, like the Red DI, if you've heard of that, by A Designs, or the Ditto by Groove Tubes, which is a tube-based DI box that I use quite a lot. That's not to say that it's bad necessarily. It's just a different thing. Next one on Do Guitarists Need a Reamp Box? From Cant Gorgeous. Can we just cut that background noise in the mix? What he's referring to there is when I played, there was an iRig, I think it was. Oh no, so this video was when I played straight from an interface into an amp compared to a reamp box being in between. And the short answer is no, you cannot cut that background noise out in the mix. The problem with noise, especially electrical noise, is it's always there, all the time. When you've got a noise level that high, yes, you could use a gate to stop it being there in between notes that you're playing, or you could try desperately to EQ it out, but the problem is it's broadband noise, which means it covers all the frequencies, and what that means is that there is no way to EQ it out because it is on everything. So you play one nice big clean chord on your guitar and you've got in the background, unless you start using denoising software, which is usually really quite damaging to the original audio, you're not going to get rid of that. So the best way is get something like a reamp box to properly isolate your signals so you don't get all that background noise, so you don't have this problem to contend with. Comment on the Audion ID22 video. The Audion videos have had quite a lot of feedback recently. From LexTR3 says it's stupid that it's only USB. It should also support Thunderbolt. F them. I'm not sure if you understand how this is something that's probably worth talking about. Is that when a company decides to make an interface, they have to choose what interface they're using, whether it's USB, Firewire, Thunderbolt, or some choice of multiple, which is possible. I've seen that done. USB is not only fairly convenient, but it's available on pretty much every modern computer. You can even use it with like connecting through an adapter to iPads and that kind of thing. Thunderbolt is better for things like latency because of the way it works, but not only is it quite hard to get a computer that supports it, most Apple devices do, but most other devices don't, which knocks out a large percentage of the user base. But also, the main thing right now is that Intel designed Thunderbolt, and they have this thing where if you design a product with Thunderbolt chips in them, there's quite a large kind of tax, I guess you'd call it, kind of a license fee that you have to pay, and it's quite substantial, which is why there's quite a significant cost difference between Thunderbolt interfaces and the USB equivalent of the same, and that can cause some problems, because if you think about it, say the ID44, it's what, roughly £500 for the cost of it. To make it Thunderbolt, you would then be adding more money onto the cost because it would cost Audion a lot to do the licensing for it, and then they would have to then charge more because then they still have to make a living. The problem then is customers will quite often go, I'm not buying that, that's too expensive. And if you're saying that's too expensive, you don't buy it. If you don't buy it, then the company who made this product lose money, which means that there was no point in them making it in the first place. And companies investigate stuff like this. They're not stupid. Like, if say Audion were to make a rack mount 8-channel interface that they charged a lot more for, so let's say we were in the £1,000 realm. If that went from £1,000 to £1,100 to incorporate Thunderbolt, I can see that being a worthwhile price jump, because if that's a 10% price jump, that would make it reasonable. Whereas if it was a £200 interface, one of the smaller ones, and you suddenly made it a £300 interface, not only would it not be compatible with a lot of people's machines then, but it also would be way out of the price range that it was originally in, which means that it's not going to sell to its target market. So it's such a tricky thing, but that's probably why. And there's no reason why they couldn't make a Thunderbolt version in future if there's demand for it and if the cost comes down. That may be something that happens in the future, because as far as I'm aware, with the USB 4 standard that's coming up in the next couple of years, Thunderbolt's going to be incorporated into that, and there may not be that fee from Intel anymore. So that could make incentives a lot more, you should do this because price of the device isn't going to go up significantly, which means that why not? Which then means that it's going to benefit guys who want that Thunderbolt performance. So that might work. Video on the Kickdrum, the hole or no hole video that I made with the kick port. From Mike Kelly says, kick ports are great and do everything they advertise, except he's gone through 3 heads because the vibration eventually ripped a hairline tear going out from the ring. Yes, and I have to say that when I did that video deciding whether you should have a hole in a kick drum or not, which by the way I specifically didn't put a microphone in the hole, because the point of that video was to show the overall sound of the drum changing, not look where you can put a microphone now. Anyway, I just got a knife and cut a hole out, and eventually not only would that cause a tear and rip through the skin, it actually did. It destroyed the head because I accidentally leant through it while I was positioning a microphone a few weeks later, and I kind of fell over, leant on it, and rip, and yeah, it went through the head. So, moral of the story there is get reinforcing rings for your heads. A lot of bass drum resonant heads come with them now, or you can get them relatively cheaply. I got a replacement, which was an Evans EQ3 skin, which came with a hole pre-cut, so I didn't have to get a knife and do some awful kind of cutting, and it was pre-reinforced. So I put the kick port in, and it's been absolutely solid ever since, and because of the reinforcing rings, there's been absolutely zero issues. So yeah, that is definitely a caveat that I didn't think of at the time, which is, yeah, if you're doing the kick port installation to your skins regularly, reinforce that hole so it doesn't rip. Comment on the Sono video from GL. Nice review, cheers. Would have loved to have seen about its ACO performance and a little driver review for Windows 10. Now, I can understand why you would want me to do a review of latency and that kind of thing, because that sounds like an obvious thing that should be included in a review. However, especially with YouTube, there's a problem. And the problem is that once the video is up, it's up forever. And things like drivers improve over time. They can be made to be better. This is a great example. Audience version 3 drivers, which were used for the ID14 and ID22 when they were out, the latency on Windows wasn't amazing. It was something like, at 512 sample latency, I think it was something like 15 millisecond round trip, which wasn't great. But then they came out with their V4 drivers, and for every interface across the board that they did, latency was massively improved, to the point where I had no complaints. Yes, I've seen better latency on a select few USB devices, but I'm really clutching at straws to get better performance. We're talking like RME money, where it's 3 or 4 times the price for the same spec of interface. So the reason that I don't really touch that in reviews now is that there may well be further improvements down the line for any USB-based Audion device. If they find ways to improve the drivers, and they probably will, then latency and performance will probably be even better than it is now. And so if I'm lamenting that in a video, and a year from now, or even 6 months from now, they come out with a great update that changes all that, people who then go back and watch my video won't know about that, and they'll be like, oh, well, he said the latency was bad, I'm not going to buy it. Which would then be a falsehood. And it's something that's quite tricky, which is why I generally tend to focus on the hardware and what the hardware can do, because that bit, in theory at least, is timeless. And if there is a hardware update, that generally tends to be a whole new product, in which case I can do a kind of a review update and say, hey, here's this version which has these improvements. So that then would make sense, because generally speaking, on the box of the new thing, it's called something slightly different. So when people search for a review of the new thing, they don't look at the review of the old thing, or at least it's quite obvious to them that they're not looking at the same thing. Here's an interesting one. On the ID44 video, it's about 4 to 5 months in. Do you still think you need a DI box? I own this interface and the DI is ridiculously strong and clear. It's JFET, so I'm wondering what a DI box would add here. Now, this is an interesting question, actually, because having tried the DI input on the ID44, I was very impressed by its performance. Very impressed. It was clear, there was no interference on it from other channels, which is usually a big issue with interface DIs. And if you're recording guitars with a virtual guitar amp and you're not connecting anything else up to it, then I think the ID44 is one of those rare circumstances where using its inbuilt DI is as good as a professional high-end DI box. And that's seriously rare, and it took me a while to kind of come to terms with that. But the reason I would still, as a blanket, say get a DI box is several reasons. Firstly, your interface, if it's not an ID44, may not be up to the same standards. Secondly, if your guitar or whatever doesn't have a particularly high output and you start turning up the gain, and you've got other channels with preamps with the gain pretty high, there may still be a chance in that interface for some crosstalk, which is to say other channels bleeding noise or background stuff into each other's channels, which is rare in modern interfaces because they're all quite electrically well designed now, but it's still a possibility, whereas with a DI box, that generally gets taken out of the equation and is separately electrically isolated, and the DI is being converted into a microphone level signal, which doesn't need much additional gain, in a completely separate box. And also, if you want to record anything at any point by looping that guitar out, connecting it also to an amp or to anything that makes real-time noise, you're going to need a great DI box. And if at any point you get any grounding problems, like you get hum on anything, which I've sometimes found in buildings where the electrics aren't great, if you've got a DI box, you can then lift the earth on that, and that hum goes away. And it may only be tiny, it may only be slightly annoying, but as soon as you put like a heavy sounding guitar modeling amp on that, that hum is times by 100 because of the heavy gain of the amp. So suddenly becomes, and it's really, really difficult to remove afterwards. So generally speaking, I would still say play it safe, get yourself a DI box, a good one. In the case of the ID44, if that's all you're recording is one guitar at one time, it's fine. One on the Slate ML2 microphone fail video that I did, Pirate Llama Recording Studio says it's a moisture issue. I have 12 of them. 12? Whoa. And if it gets humid or really cold, they get noisy. At least that was my problem. It could have been that. It is no secret that when I'm not in my studio, the heating's not on, it does get cold in there. So it's entirely possible. But it's pretty much never been an issue for me with any other microphone that I've had. Which means, you know, I can't be waiting around with my microphones over the radiator for an hour before I get recording every time I want to record with them. It may well be that they get left on stands for a little while, which, although I admit is not ideal, sometimes that just happens. Sometimes you're in the middle in between two sessions, and it's not worth the hour to pack everything down and the hour to set it all up again. I need my microphones to be reliable, and every other microphone I have, from a £50 budget to a £1,500 budget, doesn't have that issue. So the only suggestion I would have there is that Slate need to design the microphone to be at least a little bit more hardy to the elements. And I'm not talking minus 20 degrees C. I'm talking 5 degrees C. You know, a cold room, but a kind of a normal cold room. That's not supposed to be too much to ask for a regular working microphone. So yeah, hopefully that gets fixed in the quality control, because as much as that may have been the issue, that's not great. I mean, it would be good to know what the issue is, but at the end of the day, it's much more about having the issue than knowing what it is. And last for today, from Sing in Perfect English. I've never seen such a quality conversation in the comments before. With this video in the comments, I got everything I needed. Thank you for being so amazing to create a community like this. And thank you everybody who puts comments on our videos. I do try to make sure that the community that surrounds Hot Pole Studios on YouTube is a positive one, and that people are answering each other's questions. There's no such thing as a silly question either. If you've got a genuine question that you would like to have answered, by all means ask it, because that's what we're here for. It's not just me at this point. There are several members of our kind of comment community where if you ask a good question, if I am too busy to reply, somebody else will. And I'm really quite proud that you guys are picking that up and becoming kind of a thing. You may notice at some point, if someone makes a particularly nasty comment, I either reply with a rebuttal, or if it's just not particularly useful and it's just nasty, then I quite often remove them. And that's not because I want this to be an echo chamber or anything like that. It's very much because I don't want this to be a place on YouTube where people can expect to be horrible to other people and expect to get away with it. That's not what we're about here. If someone disagrees with my assessment, fine, great, fantastic. I want to know. If you have an opinion other than mine, I want to know, because it may well be one of several things. It may be that you've not thought about the particular subject in the ways that I've thought about it. It may be that I've not thought about your perspective, and I'd be quite happy to learn about it. And it may well be that something that you thought you knew turns out not to be true. And sometimes it takes a bit of an investigation from me or another member of the community. And that is a tool for learning. I pretty much never say this is the truth, this is the only way. Because if there's anything I've come to learn by teaching this kind of stuff, it's that there are 10 ways of doing everything. And for some people, one way is a better way than the way that I would do it. And that's okay, that's great. If you think I'm wrong because I do something a certain way, if you put that quite politely, I'm more than willing to debate. If you just say, you're an idiot, I'm never going to watch your channel again, or something like that, that doesn't help anybody. That's not constructive, that's not positive, that's not helping anybody, and it also makes you look like a fool. So for your own benefit, quite often I will remove those kind of comments. But you know what they say, you know you've made it on YouTube when you get your first haters, and boy do I get some haters. Like, I've made some videos that are quite inflammatory, at least in their titles, like Pro Tools sucks, or, you know, that kind of thing. I hate Pro Tools. I think that was one where I get people going, keyboard warrior, and it was a bit of a, you know, clickbaity title, but it was to get people talking constructively. people sending me messages saying, you don't know anything because this, because that, doesn't help. There was one bit where I mistakenly thought that Avid was bought by DigiDesign in the late 90s. It turns out that Avid for a long time, well, for a very long time, owned DigiDesign, and they just happened to change the branding at some point. Fair enough. I'll have it. I learned something. And I still don't think that affected my arguments very much. But there's no need to call me the worst things under the sun because of that. It's just something I wasn't aware of. Anyway, that's probably a good place to leave the viewers' comments because I've been prattling on for far too long. So if you guys have any comments you'd like to ask us, any questions, anything at all, feel free to leave them in the comments section down below on any of the videos, not just this one. And if you're a patron of ours on Patreon, then feel free to get your questions in on Patreon, and your questions will be top of this list. That's just a thank you and a way to give back to the people who are helping us. There's a few guys on there helping us out with just $1 a month, and that's not a lot, but that adds up quickly and helps us keep the lights on, helps us keep people fed, helps us to go out and do some of the more crazy stuff that we do. So thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you in the next video. Goodbye. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.